The scent of dust motes dancing in weak sunlight usually brought Paige a strange comfort. A dry, slightly metallic smell that reminded her of old books and quiet afternoons. Not today. Today it felt like the ghost of 1,000 forgotten hopes. She traced the peeling wallpaper of her childhood bedroom, a faded rose pattern that had once seemed beautiful, now just tired. It matched the tired state of her own heart. Her fingers brushed over a crayon drawing of a lopsided cupcake, a relic from a time when her biggest worry was if her mom would remember sprinkles for the birthday cake. Now her biggest worry was losing everything, and there was no one left to remember the sprinkles. Her childhood bedroom, now her office and her sanctuary, was a constant reminder of everything she was fighting to keep. The worn wooden floorboards creaked under her weight, a familiar protest with every step she took. Her desk, a cheap particle board thing she'd bought secondhand, was cluttered with the tools of her trade. A worn drawing tablet, a half-empty mug of coffee gone cold hours ago, and a stack of rejection emails. The glow of her computer screen cast a cold blue light on her face, illuminating the dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She had been up all night, staring at a blank screen, trying to design a logo for a local dog grooming salon. The client wanted something playful but also elegant, and Paige felt the two words cancel each other out in a cloud of creative paralysis. Her mind was a wasteland picked clean by worry. A sharp rap on the door startled her, making her jump. "Paige, you in there?" Her landlord, Mr. Henderson, his voice booming but kind, rattled the doorknob. "Just checking on the rent, dear. It's a little overdue." A little was a generous term. The eviction notice sat on her nightstand, a stark white rectangle threatening to unravel her entire world. The notice wasn't a threat. It was a deadline, a countdown to disaster. Paige's small graphic design business, a dream nurtured through late nights and cheap coffee, was barely clinging on. She'd started it with the last of her inheritance after her dad passed away, a final desperate gamble to build something of her own. She'd promised him she wouldn't let his memory fade away, that she'd make something of herself. But the world, it turned out, didn't care about promises. The bills had piled up, the clients had dried up, and her savings had evaporated like water on a hot sidewalk. One more bad month and it would all crumble. She opened the door, forcing a smile that felt brittle like spun glass. "Hey, Mr. Henderson. I'm working on it. Really close." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. He nodded, his gaze softening as he took in the boxes stacked in the corner, the hopeful but failing designs tacked to her wall. He had known her since she was a little girl, before her mom left and before her dad got sick. He knew her dream was a fragile thing, and he wasn't a cruel man, just a tired one. "I know you are, sweetie. You got good stuff here. Just, time's running out." He patted her arm, a gesture of sympathy that only made the lump in her throat grow. He was giving her a grace period that had already stretched into a full month. He couldn't afford to be a charity case for much longer. He left, the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway and out of her life for a brief moment. After he left, the silence in the room pressed in, heavier than before. It was a silence filled with the weight of her failures, a symphony of what-ifs and could-have-beens. Paige sank onto her worn mattress, pulling her knees to her chest. She remembered her dad, before he got sick, telling her she could do anything. "You got a spark, kiddo," he'd said, ruffling her hair. "Don't ever let anyone dim it." His words had been a compass, a guiding light through the dark. But right now the spark felt like a dying ember. The light was flickering, threatening to go out for good. She reached for her phone, the screen a lifeline to the outside world she was so close to losing. The same email notification glared back at her for the 10th time. Her finger hovered over it, a strange mixture of dread and hope swirling inside her. The subject line was a siren's call. "Congratulations. You've been selected for Faded Hearts." He knew the show. She'd seen the commercials on a late-night channel while she was working. It was a cheesy reality dating show. The premise was ridiculous. Contestants were supposedly fated mates, and were forced to go on a series of cringy dates and challenges to prove their destined love. The whole thing was a joke, a farce for people who believed in fairy tales and destiny. The kind of people who had never had their world ripped out from under them. Paige wasn't one of them. She was a realist. She believed in hard work, in paying bills, in the brutal truth of the world. But the prize money. The grand prize was a cool $100,000. A sum of money that could not only pay her rent and outstanding bills, but would be enough to get her business back on its feet. Could save everything. It felt like a betrayal of every sensible bone in her body, a desperate leap into the absurd. A pact with the devil of reality television. She would have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. She'd have to act like she believed in a cosmic connection with some stranger, to smile and bat her eyelashes at a man she'd never met, all for the entertainment of a bloodthirsty audience. But what choice did she have? The silence of the room, the weight of her looming future, screamed the answer. She was backed into a corner, and this was the only way out. She had to swallow her pride. She had to fake it till she made it. She had to put on a show and convince herself it was the right thing to do. She had to risk her dignity to save her life. Her dad's voice echoed in her head, a soft whisper that felt so far away. "You've got a spark, kiddo." Would he be proud of her? Or would he be heartbroken to see her giving up on her principles, on the core of who she was? He didn't know. All she knew was that she was a coward if she didn't try. With a trembling hand, she clicked the email, bringing up the acceptance form. She had to confirm her attendance, sign a mountain of legal waivers, and agree to the ridiculous terms and conditions. She had to agree to give up her freedom for a chance at a prize that felt almost too good to be true. She stared at the contract, at the fine print, her eyes blurring with unshed tears. The show promised love and destiny. All she saw was a paycheck and a chance to survive. It was the most cynical, most humiliating thing she had ever done. She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. "Please," she whispered to the empty air, to the peeling wallpaper, to the ghost of her dad's voice. "Please let this work." Her dignity was a small price to pay for survival. She took a deep breath, and with a final desperate sigh, she hit accept. There was no turning back. The die was cast. Her life, a small boat on a raging sea, was about to be swept into a storm, and she had no choice but to ride the waves and pray they didn't swallow her whole. The humiliation of the present moment was nothing compared to the desperation of a future without a home, without a purpose. She was doing this for her dad. For her business. For herself. Even if it killed her. Chapter 1. The studio was a dizzying kaleidoscope of pinks, reds, and the kind of glitter that seemed to permanently attach itself to your soul. It was a visual assault, a testament to bad taste and the saccharine sweet idea of romance. Paige blinked, feeling utterly out of place in her sensible jeans and a t-shirt amidst a sea of perfectly coiffed, shimmering contestants. They were a flock of peacocks, preening for the cameras, and she felt like a very practical sparrow who had accidentally flown into the wrong aviary. Fated hearts indeed. She felt more fated for a nervous breakdown than for true love. She had spent the last 2 days in a blur of hair and makeup appointments she hadn't asked for and had no idea how to replicate. Her hair, which she usually tied in a messy bun, was now in a perfect cascade of waves that felt foreign and a little too polished. A makeup artist had airbrushed her face until she looked less like Paige and more like a glossy mannequin. Every time she looked in a mirror, she felt a pang of unease. This person wasn't her. This person was a product, a character in a show she didn't want to be in. She had to remind herself of the number in the bank account, the figure that would save her life. It was a sobering thought, a cold splash of reality that cut through the glitter and pink lights. A peppy production assistant, a whirlwind of energy named Brittany, practically bounced towards her. Brittany wore a headset, a bright pink jumpsuit, and an expression of unshakable enthusiasm that Paige found both impressive and deeply unsettling. "Paige," So glad you're here. Your energy is just chef's kiss. So natural. Now remember the vibe, right? Finding your soulmate, destiny, all that jazz. Brittany's voice was high-pitched, a little too loud, and it grated on Paige's already frayed nerves. Paige managed a weak smile. Got it. Destiny. Right. She took a deep breath, trying to look less like she was about to flee for the nearest exit. A nervous sweat was forming on her brow, threatening to ruin the hours of work the makeup artist had put in. She needed to calm down. This was just a job. A very weird, very public job. Then she saw him. He was leaning against a prop Grecian column, a ridiculous piece of set dressing that was clearly made of foam. The column was supposed to look majestic, but he made it look like something a stray dog had peed on. He had his arms crossed, a suit jacket slung over one shoulder, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on the planet, preferably one without cameras or glitter. Dark hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that held a simmering annoyance that Paige found oddly appealing. Or maybe that was just her own annoyance reflecting back at her. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, but somehow managed to make it look rumpled with sheer force of will. He sighed, a dramatic audible exhale that made his shoulders slump. He looked like a man who was counting down the seconds until he could be somewhere else. He was a beacon of misery in a sea of manufactured happiness, and Paige felt a strange sense of kinship with him. Brittany clapped her hands, her voice cutting through the studio noise. All right, everyone. Time to meet your fated partners. We'll start with our bachelors. Please step forward. A groan rippled through the male contestants. The man against the column just sighed, a long, weary sound running a hand through his hair. He looked over at the other guys who were all preening and flexing for the cameras, and shook his head, a faint look of disgust on his face. Paige had a bad feeling. A really bad, strangely exciting feeling. She had a feeling he was going to be her fated partner. She had that kind of luck. The bad kind. Brittany's voice boomed again. First, we have our most requested bachelor, the one and only Jasper Hayes. The annoying man stiffened. Jasper. Of course. He sauntered over, a forced charm plastered on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. He moved with a kind of predatory grace, a controlled, powerful energy that seemed out of place in the glittery studio. He stopped in front of Paige, extending a hand. His hand was large, his fingers long, and the movement was fluid and smooth. Pleasure to meet you, Paige, he drawled, his voice a low rumble that sent a strange shiver down her spine. His grip was firm, almost crushing, and a strange current like static electricity shot up her arm. It wasn't unpleasant, just shocking. Like touching a live wire. Likewise, Jasper, Paige replied, pulling her hand back a little too quickly. The feeling of his hand on hers lingered, a warm, tingling sensation that she couldn't explain. So, fated, huh? Pretty confident in that claim, are we? She tried to sound nonchalant, but her heart was beating a little too fast. She wasn't an idiot. She knew she was being set up with the grumpy but hot one, and she was playing her part, even if she didn't want to. Jasper's eyes narrowed slightly, a faint flicker of amusement in their depths. Just following the script, darlin'. Don't take it personally. His voice was a low whisper meant only for her. Oh, I wouldn't dream of it, Paige shot back, a spark of her usual wit finally igniting. She was done pretending to be a timid mouse. She was going to be herself, the best she could, and if they didn't like it, they could send her home. Just making sure we're on the same page. No actual fated feelings involved. He actually cracked a genuine, if fleeting, smile. It was a quick flash of humor that transformed his entire face, and for a second he didn't look so annoyed. Wouldn't want to get confused. Good. Brittany, oblivious to their simmering non-chemistry, squealed into her headset. Oh, the tension. It's palpable. So much potential. The bickering. It's going to be great television. Paige and Jasper exchanged a look that clearly said, this is going to be a long, painful ride. Chapter 2. Their first romantic activity, was a disaster. A masterclass in manufactured intimacy and genuine awkwardness. The producers had set up a charming pottery class in a barn studio just a few miles from the main house. The air, thick with the earthy smell of clay and the subtle scent of wet soil, was supposed to be romantic and calming. For Paige it was a pleasant, grounding experience. For Jasper it was a form of pure, unadulterated torture. Paige, despite her initial protests about the entire situation, actually found herself enjoying shaping the clay. Her years of graphic design had given her a steady hand and a surprising appreciation for form and function. She was working on a small, lopsided bowl, her fingers covered in a fine layer of gray clay. The process of molding something from nothing was a welcome distraction from the constant glare of the cameras and the pressure of the competition. Jasper, on the other hand, looked like he was being tortured. He sat across from her at the pottery wheel, his perfectly tailored suit sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms that were now streaked with clay. The suit was an expensive one, Paige could tell, and the sight of him so out of place in his high-end clothes and his aura of simmering aggression was both ridiculous and captivating. His brow was furrowed in a deep scowl as he glared at the spinning lump of clay in front of him. He was losing a battle of wills with an inanimate object. "Just make a vase, Jasper," Paige instructed, trying to keep a straight face as he repeatedly squashed his clay into an unrecognizable blob. He was hitting it with his fist, kneading it with a force that seemed entirely unnecessary. The pottery wheel groaned under his frustrated ministrations. "You're supposed to be gentle with it. It's not an enemy. It's not cooperating," he grumbled, wiping clay off his perfectly good suit. His frustration was so palpable, so genuine, that a tiny bubble of laughter escaped Paige. It was the first honest laugh she had in days. "This is stupid. Why can't we just talk?" "Because that's not Fated Hearts material," Paige explained, rolling her eyes. She leaned over, placing her hands over his, guiding his fingers to the clay. The contact, though brief, sent that familiar jolt up her arm. It was a strange energy, a warmth that had nothing to do with body heat, a pull that felt both dangerous and thrilling. She quickly pulled her hands away, a faint blush creeping up her neck. "We're supposed to be discovering our hidden passions together. The pottery is a metaphor for molding our lives into one." She recited the show's tagline with a heavy dose of sarcasm. Jasper snorted. "My hidden passion right now is leaving. And my life feels more like a swamp than a piece of art." He gave up entirely, leaning back in his chair with a dramatic sigh. "What's the point of all this? This whole show is a lie." Paige's playful demeanor faded. "The point," she said, her voice low and serious, "is that some of us need the prize money. It's not all fun and games. Some of us are here for a reason." She looked at him, her eyes holding his. Her words were a shield, a way to hide her own desperation, but they were also the truth. She was here to save her life. She wasn't here for love or destiny or any of the fairy tale nonsense. Jasper's expression softened just for a moment. He saw something in her eyes, a vulnerability that mirrored his own sense of being trapped. "Right?" he muttered, nodding slowly. "The money." He looked at her, and for a second, their shared misery was a connection more genuine than anything the show could have manufactured. After the pottery fiasco, their next intimate dinner was even more of a struggle. The producers had set up a table for two in a lush garden, surrounded by string lights and strategically placed cameras. A violin quartet played a romantic ballad in the distance. It was all so perfectly staged that it felt completely fake. Paige and Jasper sat across from each other, a silver cloche separating them from their plates of meticulously prepared food. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and herbs and something else, something earthy and wild that Paige couldn't place. "So, Jasper," Paige began, trying to sound interested, "what do you do when you're not finding your fated mate on national television?" She twirled her fork, trying to make the moment seem less painful than it actually was. He took a large bite of his steak, chewing thoughtfully. His eyes darted around the garden, scanning the shadows as if looking for something no one else could see. Run a business. Manage property. The usual. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. You. Graphic design. Trying to get my own studio off the ground. Huh. That was the extent of his interest. The conversation died a swift and painful death. Suddenly, a loud growl erupted from Jasper. Not a human growl, but a deep, rumbling sound that made the cutlery vibrate on the table. He slapped a hand over his stomach, his face going a shade paler. His eyes, usually a cool gray, seemed to flash with a brief amber light. He looked genuinely startled, as if the sound had surprised him as much as it had Paige. "Everything all right, Jasper?" Paige asked, genuinely concerned. "Are you hungry?" That sounded a little intense. "Fine," he muttered, his voice a little rougher than before. His eyes darted nervously towards the cameras, then back at her. "Just indigestion." He gave a convincing, if slightly over-the-top cough. A small, perfectly grilled chicken breast sat on a nearby plate, abandoned by another contestant who'd gone to the restroom. Before Paige could blink, Jasper had subtly, almost imperceptibly, swiped it. He did it with a kind of practiced, graceful swiftness that was impossible to follow. 1 second it was there, the next it was in his hand. He ate it in 2 swift bites, a faint sheen of satisfaction crossing his face. Paige stared, mouth agape. She had seen the entire impossible act. "Did you just steal that chicken?" Jasper cleared his throat, looking innocent. "No. I was just admiring its presentation." He wiped his mouth with a napkin, a picture of polished, innocent charm. The producers, of course, loved it. They had a feed on their earpieces, and Brittany's voice, a high-pitched squeal, was audible even to Paige. Oh, his playful hunger. So primal. They're already sharing food. He's just so enamored with her he's even sharing his meal. It's destiny. Paige just shook her head, a small, involuntary smile playing on her lips. This was going to be a long, strange month. It was the first truly funny thing that had happened since she arrived. The absurd lie of the show was so perfectly matched with the absurd lie of Jasper's behavior that it was all she could do not to laugh out loud. She had no idea what was going on, but she was starting to get the distinct feeling that Jasper Hayes was a lot more than just an annoyed reality TV star. He was something else entirely. Something strange and possibly dangerous. And for the first time since she had arrived, she felt a flicker of something other than dread. Chapter 3. The next challenge was a wilderness survival date. The producer's idea of wilderness was a manicured park a few miles outside of town, complete with paved walking paths and conveniently located restrooms. Still, they were given a small tent, a few basic survival supplies, and told to bond with nature and each other. As if they were contestants on some high-stakes game show, rather than a cheesy romance one. The entire setup felt utterly ridiculous to Paige, a city girl through and through who considered a park wild, if it had more than 2 trees and a stray pigeon. But Jasper strangely seemed to come alive. As soon as the cameras were a respectable distance away, hiding in the bushes with telephoto lenses that could probably read the fine print on a can of bug spray, Jasper practically ripped open a bag of beef jerky. He tore into it with a hunger that was startling. His movements were quick, efficient, and almost animalistic. He didn't chew so much as he devoured, his eyes closed in what looked like pure bliss. Finally, something edible, he grumbled between bites, a faint layer of beef jerky crumbs clinging to his lips. "You know, you could try to act a little more enthusiastic," Paige suggested, her hands tangled in the frustrating ropes of the tent. It was a flimsy thing, a pop-up tent that refused to pop up, and she was sweating under the late afternoon sun. "It's prize money, remember? We have to at least look like we're having fun." He shrugged, offering her a piece of jerky. She politely declined. "I'm here on a dare, Paige," he said, chewing loudly. My pack thinks I need to branch out and diversify my dating pool. Apparently, reality TV is the perfect solution. He rolled his eyes, a look of utter disgust on his face. They're idiots. My family pie pack is made of idiots. They probably thought this would be a fun little vacation for me. They have no idea what they've gotten me into. Paige stopped struggling with the tent pole, her hands still. She was intrigued by his comment. Your pack? She asked, her voice cautious. The word sounded so strange coming from his lips. It wasn't a word you used in casual conversation. It was a word that belonged in fantasy novels and ancient legends. Jasper froze. His body went rigid, and for a second he seemed to be desperately searching for an excuse, a lie, anything. He wasn't as smooth as he thought he was. He was a terrible liar. My fantasy football league. Yeah. My league. The Wolves of Wall Street. We have a stupid name. He forced a laugh that sounded strained and unnatural. They dared me. Loser buys pizza for a month. He gestured vaguely to a group of his friends who were also contestants on the show, but none of them were anywhere near them. They're crazy. They love this stuff. He looked anywhere but at her. Before Paige could question his bizarre fantasy football league, a small furry creature, a squirrel, scurried by their campsite. It was carrying a large acorn in its mouth and it looked terrified. Suddenly Jasper's head snapped up. His nose twitched and he let out another low growl, a more pronounced one this time, a sound that was less human and more wild. The sound seemed to come from deep within his chest, a primal rumble that made the hair on Paige's arms stand on end. His eyes flashed, a glint of something wild and predatory in their depths that had nothing to do with frustration and everything to do with instinct. Jasper. Paige yelped, startled. What was that? He shook his head, looking momentarily disoriented as if he had just woken up from a bad dream. Allergies. Bad pollen out here. He gave a fake sneeze that was so bad it was laughable. He quickly stood up, stretching, his movements suddenly fluid and powerful. I need to scout for firewood. He practically sprinted into the trees, disappearing from sight in a blur of motion. Paige stared after him, utterly bewildered. Allergies? That wasn't an allergy. That was a sound a predator would make. A sound a wolf would make. She felt a shiver run down her spine. The air, which had been thick with the sound of cheerful birds and chirping insects, now seemed to hold a different kind of energy, a tension that was both exciting and terrifying. She heard a loud rustling in the bushes, then a triumphant howl far too deep for a human, even a man as large as Jasper. A moment later, Jasper emerged from the trees, casually carrying an entire fallen branch, much too large for him to have broken off cleanly. He looked perfectly normal, if a little flushed and out of breath. He looked like a man who had just had a good workout. Good find? Paige asked, bewildered. Her voice was a little higher than usual. Yep. Strong wood, he said, avoiding her gaze. He threw the branch down with a thud that vibrated the ground, startling the other contestants in the nearby campsites. The cameras that were hidden in the bushes seemed to shift their focus to him, a subtle whirring sound audible to Paige. He acted as if he had just found a few twigs for a fire, not an entire tree branch. As the evening wore on around a small contained campfire, the forced facade began to crack. The other contestants had gone back to their tents, tired from the day's events. It was just the two of them, the crackling fire and the silent, ever-present cameras. Away from the constant glare of the studio lights, a different side of Jasper emerged. He was still sarcastic, but there was a dry wit to him that made Paige laugh, a deep, genuine laugh that surprised them both. He told her a story about trying to fix a leaky pipe in a remote cabin, which turned into a multi-day ordeal involving a territorial moose and a very confused plumber. The story was so absurd, so genuinely funny that Paige was doubled over with laughter. So, what's your business really? Paige asked, poking at the fire with a stick. Because managing property sounds suspiciously vague. She wasn't going to let him get away with it again. There was something more to Jasper Hayes than just an annoyed reality TV contestant. A lot more. And she wanted to know what it was. Her curiosity was a fire, burning as brightly as the one in front of her. He sighed, staring into the flames. He looked tired, the mask of indifference he wore so well cracking. "Okay, fine. I run a specialized security firm. We deal with unusual problems." He chose his words carefully, as if they were dangerous things he needed to handle with care. Paige raised an eyebrow. "Unusual problems? Like lost cats in trees?" she teased, her voice light but her eyes serious. She was waiting for him to slip up, to tell her a little more than he intended to. Jasper actually chuckled, a low rumbling sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "More like things that go bump in the night. The kind of bumps that could break a city block." His eyes, a shade darker now in the firelight, met hers, a hint of something ancient and powerful in their depths. He didn't elaborate and Paige didn't push. But as she watched him, the firelight dancing in his intense eyes, she felt a strange flicker of curiosity. It was a curiosity that had nothing to do with the show and everything to do with the man. She had a feeling that he was hiding something big, something that went beyond a simple dare from a fantasy football league. And a part of her, the part that craved adventure, the part that had been slowly dying under the weight of her worries, found herself inexplicably drawn in. She had no idea what she was getting herself into, but for the first time in a very long time she was excited. She had to know more. She needed to know more. It was no longer about the prize money. It was about the man who was in front of her. The man who had been a beacon of misery in a sea of manufactured happiness. The man who was now a mystery she had to solve. And she knew in her gut that this mystery was far more interesting than any fake romance could ever be. She had a feeling that this was going to be the most chaotic, most ridiculous, and most dangerous month of her life. And she couldn't wait to see what happened next. She had a feeling that she was in for a wild ride and she was ready for it. She was ready for anything. Chapter 4. The next day the challenge was a romantic picnic. The producers had laid out a lavish spread on a large red checkered blanket in a sun-dappled meadow. There were artisanal cheeses, a crusty loaf of bread, fresh fruit, and a bottle of sparkling cider, all artfully arranged to look like a page out of a fancy magazine. Paige's inner graphic designer almost felt a pang of admiration for the sheer effort put into the aesthetic. Jasper's eyes, however, seemed to fixate on a different, more primal object. The entire charcuterie board, which he was eyeing with a disturbing intensity. He was no longer just hungry, he was hungry with a capital H. He was a force of nature, a vortex of appetite, and the charcuterie board was a tiny island in a vast sea of his hunger. "Remember, team," Brittany's voice chirped from a nearby bush, where she was undoubtedly hiding with a camera person, "share and savor. This is about connection." Her voice, though muffled, was as irritating as ever. "Connection," Jasper muttered, already eyeing the prosciutto. He picked up a slice and sniffed it, a low, appreciative growl rumbling in his chest. He looked like a man who hadn't eaten in a week, not a man who had devoured an entire bag of beef jerky the night before. Paige tried to engage him in conversation as she carefully arranged some grapes on her plate. "So, about those unusual problems you deal with. Got any fun stories?" She wasn't going to let the topic drop. Her curiosity was now a tangible thing, a burning sensation in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. She needed to know more about this mysterious man who was more like a wild animal than a human. "Define fun," he said, snagging a handful of cheese. "Most of them involve claws, fangs, and a lot of paperwork." He chewed on a piece of hard cheddar, his eyes scanning the meadow, as if he expected a wild animal to come charging out of the woods at any moment. "Oh, you're one of those method actors, huh?" Paige teased, trying to lighten the mood. He still had to pretend this was a dating show after all. "Preparing for your next werewolf movie?" She gave him a playful jab in the ribs with her elbow. Jasper choked on a cracker, coughing loudly. His face went a shade of red that had nothing to do with the sun. Something like that. He gave her a panicked look, a silent plea for her to drop the subject. Suddenly his nose twitched. He leaned in, sniffing the air, his eyes wide and alert. "Is that fried chicken?" he asked, his voice a low, hungry whisper. Paige rolled her eyes. "Jasper, it's a gourmet picnic. We have brie and fig jam. No fried chicken." She had no idea how he could even tell the difference. Everything smelled like a mixture of grass, flowers, and the subtle scent of wet soil. But he was already scanning the horizon. A family a few picnic blankets over had indeed brought a bucket of fried chicken. The scent of it, a mixture of crispy breading and seasoned chicken, seemed to call to him. Jasper's eyes narrowed, a predatory gleam in them. He was a hunter and the fried chicken was his prey. "Don't even think about it," Paige warned, grabbing his arm. The jolt of electricity she felt was still there, but now it was familiar, a part of their chaotic dynamic. She was trying to be his voice of reason, the sane one in a very insane situation. Too late. In a blur, Jasper had somehow, impossibly, made his way to the other family's blanket. He moved with a speed and grace that was supernatural. Paige blinked and he was gone. She blinked again and he was standing over a bewildered family, a charming smile plastered on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Excuse me, folks," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm with a reality show and we're doing a segment on community sharing. Would you mind if I just sampled one of your delicious drumsticks?" Before the bewildered family could respond, he grabbed not one but 3 drumsticks, wolfed them down, offered a quick "Thanks. You guys are great," and was back beside Paige, looking utterly innocent. He was a magician, a thief, and a charming scoundrel all rolled into one. It was a performance so seamless, so natural, that Paige couldn't help but be impressed. Paige stared, mouth agape. "You just stole their chicken." Again. She couldn't believe her eyes. This was the second time she had seen him do something like this. He had no shame, no fear, no regard for the cameras. He was a force of nature and she was just a helpless spectator. "Shared," Jasper corrected, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "It's all about sharing, remember? Community spirit." He gave her a playful wink, and for the first time, Paige saw a glimpse of the man he was underneath the annoyed exterior. He was a man who was living by his own rules, a man who didn't care about what others thought of him. And she found that unbelievably attractive. The producers once again were ecstatic. Look at their quirky dynamic. He's so free-spirited, she's so grounded. It's an opposites attract dream. Brittany's voice was now a squeal of pure delight. Paige just sighed, leaning back against the picnic blanket, a small smile on her face. "You know, for someone who hates this show, you're surprisingly good at creating drama for it." Jasper smirked, a genuine unforced smile that made her heart do a funny little flip. "What can I say? I'm a natural." He gestured to the now depleted picnic basket. It was a wasteland of half-eaten food, a testament to his unending hunger. "Want the last of the sparkling cider?" Paige looked at the single forlorn bottle amidst the wreckage of their supposed romantic spread. "Sure, why not? Might as well enjoy the chaos." She took a sip of the cider, her eyes meeting his. She had no idea what she was doing, what she had gotten herself into. But for the first time in a long time she was having fun. She was in a world of weirdness and absurdity and she was thriving. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. And she knew that this was all thanks to the strange, frustrating, and utterly captivating man in front of her. She had a feeling that this was just the beginning of their chaotic journey, and she was ready for it. She was ready for anything. Chapter 5. The show moved into the getting to know you phase, a series of more mundane day-to-day activities designed in the producers' minds to foster genuine intimacy. The first of these activities was a charity event where all the fated couples were tasked with building a bookshelf for a local library. It was meant to be a show of teamwork and shared values. A wholesome, heartwarming segment that would probably be cut down to 30 seconds of pure fluff. Paige, surprisingly handy with tools and a lover of all things functional, found herself in her element. Her dad had always been a tinkerer and he taught her the basics of carpentry. She had a keen eye for measurements and a steady hand with a power drill. She was directing Jasper, who was less useful with a hammer than he was with a stolen drumstick. He was a force of nature, a vortex of energy, but a bookshelf, a thing of straight lines and precise angles, seemed to be his greatest enemy. He was holding a hammer upside down, staring at a bag of screws with a look of intense confusion. No, Jasper, the shorter screws go here," she instructed, her voice patient as she gently took the hammer from his hand. Her fingers brushed his, and this time the static shock was more pronounced, a warmth that was no longer just a jolt of electricity but a deep, comforting heat. It wasn't a spark. It was a connection, a familiar pull that felt right, like two pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. The sensation lingered, a pleasant tingle on her fingertips, even after she pulled her hand away. He looked at his hand, then at hers, a strange expression on his face as if he were trying to figure out the source of the shock. "Right. Shorter screws." His voice was a little rougher than usual, a low murmur that made her heart skip a beat. As they worked, an easy banter developed between them. They argued about the best way to attach a shelf. He made a sarcastic comment about her precise measurements. She threw a stray piece of wood at him, playfully of course. It was comfortable, natural, and utterly devoid of the forced, faded heart's pretense. They were just two people building a bookshelf, and for a moment the cameras and the bright lights and the suffocating pressure of the show simply faded into the background. It was a moment of normalcy in a world of absurdity. Later, during a segment where they had to talk about their ideal future in front of the cameras, Paige found herself being surprisingly honest. It was a part of the show where the contestants were supposed to talk about their dreams and aspirations. Most of the other contestants talked about having a big family, a house with a white picket fence and a perfect life. But Paige had a different kind of dream. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a sudden urge to be honest, to show Jasper the real her, the part of her that was more than just a contestant on a reality show. "I just want to build something of my own," she said, her voice soft, vulnerable. "A place where creativity isn't a luxury, it's the air you breathe. A small studio where I can create things for people, where my work actually matters." She looked down at her hands, which were still covered in a fine layer of sawdust. "I don't want a perfect life. I just want a life that's my own." Jasper, who had been slouched in his chair, seemingly half asleep, suddenly sat up straighter. He looked at her, his eyes, usually so full of simmering annoyance, now holding a deep, quiet understanding. For a moment the usual mask of indifference was gone, replaced by something else, something that looked a lot like admiration. He saw the fire in her eyes, the passion that had nothing to do with fame or money. He saw the real Paige. "That's a good goal, Paige," he said, his voice low and serious. "Building something yourself. I get that." He had been forced to take over his family's business, to manage a pack he never wanted to lead, to be a man he never wanted to be. He had built something, but it wasn't his. He understood the desire for something that was truly your own. His words were simple, but they meant more to Paige than any of the cheesy compliments the other contestants had been giving their partners. A few days later, during a silly couples obstacle course challenge, things took a turn for the unexpected. The course was a series of ridiculous and slightly dangerous challenges, including a mud pit, a rope net, and a balance beam. It was a hilarious, messy, and absurdly fun event. Paige, ever the cautious one, was doing her best to navigate the course, while Jasper, in his element, was a blur of speed and agility, leaping over obstacles with a grace that was almost supernatural. He was laughing, a deep, genuine laugh that Paige had never heard before, a sound that was so full of unbridled joy that it made her own heart ache with a strange, bittersweet happiness. He was no longer the annoyed reality star. He was a wild, untamed creature, and he was beautiful. Suddenly, Paige tripped over a rope. Her foot caught on the frayed end and she went down hard, her ankle twisting in an uncomfortable angle. Before she could fall, before she could even register the pain, Jasper's arm shot out, catching her around the waist. He pulled her flush against him, his body warm and solid, his hand a vice around her middle. He was impossibly strong, impossibly fast. The air was knocked out of her lungs and she found herself pressed against his chest, her face inches from his. For a fleeting second their eyes met, and the air crackled with an unspoken intensity that had nothing to do with the cameras or the show. It was a raw, undeniable connection, a pull that was so strong it felt like an invisible force was holding them together. His grip was gentle but firm, and as he helped her regain her balance, his hand lingered at her back for just a moment too long. A blush crept up Paige's neck. She could feel his breath on her hair, the subtle scent of pine and something wild, something uniquely him. She didn't want him to let go. She wanted to stay there forever, in the warmth of his arms, safe from the chaos of the world. "Careful, sunshine," he murmured, his voice surprisingly soft. He was no longer a contestant on a reality show. He was just Jasper, and he was worried about her. She pulled away, her heart thrumming a frantic rhythm. "Thanks." She didn't trust herself to say anything else. She didn't know what she would say. She didn't know how to explain what she was feeling, what had just happened. She just knew that in that moment, in the middle of a fake reality show, something very real had happened. The producers, of course, were thrilled. They had captured the moment from every angle. Oh, the protective instinct. The almost kiss. This is pure magic. Brittany practically screamed into her headset. Paige, however, was starting to realize that the magic wasn't just for the cameras anymore. Her heart ached with a strange, confusing mix of fear and longing. She had come here for a paycheck, not a person. She had come here to save her business, not to fall in love. But every time she looked at Jasper, at his annoyed expressions, at his genuine laughs, at the strange, beautiful way he moved through the world, she felt a pull that had nothing to do with money. She was falling for him. And that was a terrifying thought. It was a betrayal of her own cynical, pragmatic nature. It was a danger she had never anticipated. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that if she let herself fall, there was no turning back. The prize money, her business, her life, it all felt small and insignificant compared to the terrifying, wonderful, and utterly chaotic pull she felt towards Jasper Hayes. Chapter 6. The next few days were a blur of manufactured romance and internal turmoil for Paige. She found herself watching Jasper with new eyes, a detective in her own mind, searching for clues that would either confirm or deny the insane suspicions that were now living rent-free in her head. She saw the subtle shifts, the lightning-fast reflexes when a prop fell, the way his gaze seemed to track things no one else could see. His eyes, in certain lights, held a depth that felt ancient and predatory, a wildness that was more than just a man playing a role. Her logical, pragmatic mind was working overtime, trying to reconcile his impossible actions with a human explanation. "He's a magician," she told herself, but she knew that wasn't true. No one could move that fast, steal a piece of fried chicken from a family 100 feet away in the blink of an eye. "He's just an actor," she thought, but she knew that wasn't true either. The fear she had seen in his eyes when he'd let out that deep, guttural growl was a fear that was too genuine to be faked. It was a fear of being exposed, a fear of being discovered. The pull she felt towards him was no longer just a weird static shock. It was a physical ache, a raw longing that made her want to get closer to him, even as a part of her screamed for her to run in the other direction. The competition was moving into its final stages, and the pressure was mounting. The other contestants, sensing a genuine connection between Paige and Jasper, even if it was a bickering, chaotic one, started to get suspicious. Their fake smiles were now thinner, their whispers louder. The entire house felt like a powder keg, and she was standing right in the middle of it, a match in her hand. One evening, after filming wrapped for the day, Paige found herself in the lounge, trying to catch her breath and find a moment of peace. She was scrolling through her phone, pretending to be busy, when she overheard two of the other contestants, Tiffany and Chad, whispering in hushed, conspiratorial tones in the corner. "There's something off about Jasper," Tiffany hissed, her voice a low, venomous sound that made Paige's stomach clench. "He's too intense. And did you see how he ate that entire cake at the dessert challenge? Like an animal." Tiffany, a beautiful blonde who had been desperate to be Jasper's fated heart, was clearly bitter. "And Paige," Chad added, his voice dripping with condescension. "She's so normal. What does she see in him? It's all an act for the cameras. He's just trying to win the money. No one would actually fall for a guy like that." Paige felt a pang of hurt, sharp and swift, like a paper cut to the soul. Was it all an act? Was her growing affection for Jasper just a delusion brought on by proximity and prize money? Was she just a desperate girl clinging to the first strange man who had paid her any attention? She felt a wave of doubt, cold and overwhelming, wash over her. It was a doubt that had been lurking in the back of her mind for days, and hearing it spoken aloud by someone else, someone who had no idea what she was going through, made it feel all the more real. She found Jasper later, alone on the patio, staring up at the moon. The air was cool and a strange earthy smell like wet soil and pine clung to him. He was a creature of the night, a man who seemed to belong in the shadows. He was a beautiful and dangerous thing, and she was drawn to him like a moth to a flame. "Hey," she said, her voice soft as she joined him. He grunted, not looking at her. "Rough day." "Yeah," she admitted, hugging herself. "People are talking. About us. About you." He finally turned, his eyes shadowed, his expression unreadable. "What are they saying?" "That you're weird. That it's all an act. That you eat like an animal." She tried to make it sound light, but her voice wavered, betraying the turmoil she was feeling. Jasper sighed, running a hand over his face. He looked exhausted, the weight of his secret pressing down on him. "They're not entirely wrong about the eating part." He paused, his gaze fixed on the moon. "Paige, there's something you should know." Paige's heart leaped into her throat. This was it. The moment of truth. She was terrified, but she was also ready. She wanted to know the truth, even if it was a terrifying one. Before he could continue, Brittany burst onto the patio, her phone in hand, her face a mask of pure delight. "Paige, Jasper, we've got a new segment. Midnight Moonlit Confessions. It's all about bearing your souls under the stars." She beamed, oblivious to the tension she just interrupted. "Go on, you two lovebirds. Confess." Jasper clenched his jaw, his moment of openness gone. He shot Paige a frustrated look that clearly said later. He was angry not at her but at the world, at the show that was constantly getting in the way of his life. As they sat under the glare of the camera lights, trying to confess staged affection, Paige couldn't shake the unease. She kept glancing at Jasper, seeing the restless energy under his skin, the way his gaze kept drifting towards the moon, which was now a full silver orb in the night sky. She saw a tension in his shoulders that had nothing to do with the cameras and everything to do with the moon. Later, unable to sleep, Paige went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Her mind was racing, replaying every moment of the last few weeks. Every strange sound, every impossible move, every whispered secret. As she passed Jasper's room, she heard a soft whimper. Hesitantly, she pushed open his door a crack. She told herself it was just her curiosity getting the better of her, but in her heart she knew she was looking for a confirmation of her deepest fears. He was asleep, but something was off. He was curled up on his bed, his muscles twitching, and a low, guttural sound rumbled in his chest, a sound that was less like a snore and more like a growl. His nose was twitching too, as if sniffing the air even in sleep. It was then, in the dim light of the hallway, that she noticed something she hadn't before. A fine, almost imperceptible layer of dark, coarse hair along his jawline, and the faintest outline of what looked like a claw where a fingernail should be. His hands resting on the pillow looked more like paws than human hands. Paige gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle the sound. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a nightmare. This wasn't a joke. This was real. She backed away slowly, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He was a realist. She had always believed in the tangible, the rational, the things she could see and touch and prove. But what she had just seen, it was impossible. It was a thing of fairy tales and legends. She backed away, her mind screaming for her to run. But her feet were frozen to the ground, and all she could do was stare at the impossible truth that was now staring back at her. What on earth was going on with Jasper Hayes? And what was she going to do now? Her world, her life, her entire belief system had just been turned upside down, and she had no idea how to put the pieces back together. Chapter 7. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity, a manic rush toward the finale. For Paige, it was a blur of manufactured romance and internal turmoil. She moved through the show like a ghost, a hollow shell of her former self. She smiled for the cameras, she laughed at Jasper's dry jokes, she even held his hand when the producers told her to. But inside her mind was a battlefield. The memory of what she had seen in his room, the image of his twitching body and the faint outline of a claw, was a constant, terrifying companion. She watched him with new eyes, a detective in her own mind, searching for clues that would either confirm or deny her insane suspicions. She saw the subtle shifts in his body language, the way his muscles tensed when a loud noise startled him, the lightning-fast reflexes when a prop fell, the way his gaze seemed to track things no one else could see. His eyes, in certain lights, held a depth that felt ancient and predatory, a wildness that was more than just a man playing a role. She now realized that the pull she felt towards him was no longer just a weird static shock. It was a physical ache, a raw longing that made her want to get closer to him, even as a part of her screamed for her to run in the other direction. She was a moth and he was a beautiful, dangerous flame. The show was building to its grand finale. A live broadcast where the fated couple would be revealed and a proposal was hinted at. A collective gasp rippled through the cast when the producers announced the finale would be a live broadcast. Paige felt sick to her stomach. She couldn't pretend anymore, not with this unsettling truth hovering between them. She couldn't lie to the world, to the audience and to herself. He had to talk to him. He had to know. She cornered Jasper in a secluded green room before the final broadcast, a quiet space with a plush couch and a full-length mirror. He was pacing, his body humming with a restless energy that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with the full moon that was due to rise in a few hours. "Jasper, we need to talk. Seriously. No cameras, no producers," she said, her voice trembling. He stopped pacing, his gaze intense. "I know. I should have told you." His voice was low and his eyes were full of a deep sadness and regret. He looked exhausted, the weight of his secret pressing down on him. "Told me what?" Paige demanded, her voice rising with a mixture of fear and anger. "That you have a bizarre allergy to squirrels? That your indigestion sounds like a wolf's growl? Or that you suddenly grow fur in your sleep?" She was a realist, a pragmatist. This was insane. She wanted him to tell her it was a joke, a bizarre marketing stunt, a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. Jasper sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of fear and determination. "I'm a werewolf, Paige." The words hung in the air, ridiculous and terrifying. Paige stared at him, then burst out laughing, a high, almost hysterical sound. She couldn't help it. It was too absurd, too unbelievable. She had always prided herself on being a logical, rational person, but in that moment, all rationality had left the building. "A werewolf? Seriously, Jasper? That's your big secret? You couldn't come up with something more believable, like a secret agent or a competitive eater." "I wish it wasn't true," he said, his voice flat. He was so calm, so matter-of-fact, that it sent a shiver down her spine. "But it is. My pack needs me to find a human mate to strengthen our standing. This show was supposed to be a joke, a way to make them happy without actually, mating. He gestured vaguely as if the concept was too bizarre to put into words. But then, Paige's laughter died, replaced by a cold dread. Me? What about me? You're infuriating. And funny. And you see through my bullshit, he admitted, a rare, soft smile touching his lips. You make me feel like a person, not just a leader. And I actually started enjoying being around you. Even when you threw that wood at me. He took a step closer. Paige, what started as a dare, as a joke, it stopped being a joke for me a while ago. He took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of her palm. You're not scared, he murmured, his voice full of wonder. Paige felt a dizzying mix of fear, disbelief, and a strange, undeniable warmth spreading through her chest. But, a werewolf? That's insane. This isn't some movie, Jasper. Tell that to the full moon, he murmured, his gaze intense. Or to my pack, who are probably watching this whole thing with popcorn and bets on how badly I mess it up. A producer's voice boomed over the intercom. 5 minutes to live, Paige and Jasper. Get ready for your moment of truth. Paige looked at Jasper, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. A part of her wanted to run, to scream, to pretend none of this was real. But another part, the part that had seen his unexpected kindness, his genuine smiles, and felt the lingering warmth of his touch, wanted to believe him. And it also wanted to know what happened next. She had a feeling that her life, the one she had worked so hard to build, was about to be changed forever. She didn't know if it was for the better or for the worse. All she knew was that the choice was hers to make, and she had to make it now. Chapter 8. The studio was an ocean of blinding lights. The audience, a sea of perfectly dressed strangers, buzzed with an electric current of anticipation. The air, thick with the scent of hairspray and manufactured excitement, felt like a living thing, a breathing organism of collective curiosity. Paige and Jasper sat on a plush velvet sofa, positioned in the center of the stage, an island in the middle of a swirling sea of cameras and crew members. A large screen behind them displayed a live feed, their nervous, smiling faces broadcast to millions of viewers. Paige felt like a doll, a character in a play, her every move being watched and judged. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and excitement. The host, Cassandra, a perpetually enthusiastic woman with a smile that could light up a city block, beamed at them. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for. Cassandra trilled, her voice a high, cheerful sound that grated on Paige's already frayed nerves. Our most captivating, most bickering, and most undeniably fated couple, Paige and Jasper. The large screen behind them lit up, and a montage of their romantic journey began to play. The producers had clearly gone for a highlights reel of their most chaotic moments. There was the pottery scene with Jasper scowling at the clay, followed by the image of Paige's hand gently guiding his. The screen cut to the intimate dinner, showing Jasper's face going pale before he masterfully swiped the chicken breast from the other table. The audience cooed and laughed at the cute squabbles. It showed the moment on the obstacle course where he had caught her, his hand lingering on her waist. The moment was edited to look like a scene from a romantic comedy, all soft focus and swelling music. The audience ate it up, convinced they were witnessing a real-life fairy tale. Paige felt a strange mix of emotions. A part of her was humiliated, seeing her life, her vulnerabilities, her budding feelings for Jasper, being turned into a television spectacle. But another part of her felt a quiet, simmering anger. They had no idea. They had no idea what was truly going on between them. They were all just watching a show, a fantasy, a carefully crafted lie. But she knew the truth. She looked at Jasper, who was watching the screen with a look of quiet intensity, a deep, unsettling calm in his eyes. He was a man with a secret that was about to be revealed to the entire world. She knew it. He knew it. And soon everyone would know it. The montage ended and the lights dimmed, leaving the stage bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. Cassandra turned to Jasper, her smile still firmly in place, but a new, more serious look in her eyes. "Jasper," she began, her voice a little softer now, a little more intimate, as if she were talking to a friend. "You've been quite the enigma this season. We've all seen your tough exterior, but we've also seen the moments of softness you've shown Paige. What is it about this woman that makes her your fated heart?" Jasper took a deep breath. He looked directly at Paige, his eyes serious and unwavering. The mask of annoyance, the cynical bravado, all of it was gone. He looked at her as if she were the only person in the room, the only person in the world. "She's the most real person I've ever met," he said, his voice low and honest, so honest it made Paige's throat tighten. "She's smart, she's determined, and she makes me laugh even when I'm trying to be annoyed." A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "She's not afraid to call me out when I'm being an idiot, and she sees through all the noise." He paused, looking at the audience, at Cassandra, at the cameras. "And I didn't think I would find anything like that here. I came here for a joke, but I found something real." He looked back at Paige, his gaze full of a raw vulnerability that made her heart ache. "She's real. And that's all that matters to me." Paige felt a lump form in her throat. His words were so simple, so honest, so completely unlike anything she had ever heard him say. It was a confession not just for the cameras but for her, a deep and honest admission of his feelings. That was surprisingly sweet. And terrifying. Because she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that his something real was a lot more complicated than a simple romantic connection. Cassandra, ever the professional, jumped in, her smile a little brighter now. "And Paige," she gushed, turning to her, "what drew you to our mysterious Jasper? What is it about him that you just couldn't resist?" Paige looked at the camera, then back at Jasper. She took a deep breath, the smell of fear and anticipation thick in the air. This was it. Her chance to run, to save herself, to lie and say that he was just a charming guy who had won her over. Or to be honest. To be brutally, terrifyingly honest. "Well," she began, a nervous laugh escaping her, "Jasper is definitely mysterious. And he has a strange habit of eating things he shouldn't." The audience chuckled. She saw his eyes flicker with a spark of amusement. He knew she was referring to the chicken incident. But underneath all the grumbling there's a good heart. And he's surprisingly protective. She took a deep breath, her voice clear and steady. "And he has a big secret." The studio fell silent. The laughter died down, replaced by a low hum of anticipation. Cassandra's smile faltered, a flicker of genuine surprise in her eyes. "A secret, Paige? We love a good mystery on Fated Hearts." Paige looked at Jasper, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, giving her his permission. "Go on." "Jasper," Paige said, her voice clear and steady, "isn't just a regular guy. He's different. He's got a family, a pack, that's very important to him." She took his hand, gripping it tightly. The familiar warmth, the jolt of static electricity, was there, a steady, comforting presence in the midst of the chaos. And sometimes, especially around a full moon, he gets a little hairy. The audience murmured, a low rumble of confusion. Cassandra forced a laugh, a brittle, sharp sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Harry. Oh, Paige, you're so funny. We all have our little quirks, don't we? This is what makes their relationship so relatable." But Jasper stood up, pulling Paige with him. He faced the camera, his gaze unyielding, his entire body a coiled spring of controlled power. "She's not joking." Then slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, a subtle transformation began. The stage lights, so bright and unforgiving, seemed to intensify the change. His jawline seemed to broaden, his eyes glowed with an amber light, and the fine hair on his arms and jawline thickened. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the stunned, silent studio. He was no longer just a man. He was a force of nature. The audience gasped. The studio was a symphony of stunned silence, punctuated by a few screams and the clicking of cameras. Cassandra's smile completely evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer terror. She looked at Jasper as if he were a monster, a horrifying creature from a horror film. "This," Jasper announced, his voice deeper, more resonant, a voice that was both human and animal, "is my truth." He looked at Paige, a raw, vulnerable plea in his eyes. "And this is the woman I want by my side, whether she believes in fated hearts or not." He reached into his pocket, his movements deliberate, and pulled out a small, simple silver ring. It wasn't flashy, not a diamond the size of a golf ball like the ones the other contestants had been using. It was a simple, elegant band, a thing of beauty in its simplicity. It felt ancient and real. "So, Paige," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through the chaos, "will you brave the chaos of my life? Will you be my mate?" Paige stared at him, at the bewildered audience, at the terrified host. This was not how she imagined saving her business. This was not how she imagined falling in love. But looking into Jasper's intense, vulnerable eyes, she knew one thing for sure. Boring was no longer an option. She wasn't a realist anymore. She wasn't a pragmatist. She was a woman in love with a werewolf, a creature of myth and legend. And in that moment, surrounded by chaos and disbelief, she had never felt more alive. She took his hand, her fingers closing around his. A small, tearful smile touched her lips. "Yes," she whispered, her voice clear and steady. "I'll brave the chaos." Her choice wasn't about prize money or a television show. It was about a different kind of prize. A prize that had fur, a lot of bickering, and an incredibly good heart. She had come here for a paycheck, but she had found something so much more. And she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that even if it was a lie, even if it was a farce, it was a beautiful lie, a beautiful farce, and it was hers. And somehow, amidst the absolute delightful chaos, she had found something real. She had found a purpose. And she had found him. Epilogue. The aftermath of Fated Hearts was, predictably, a media frenzy of unprecedented scale. "Werewolf unmasked on live TV," screamed headlines in bold, blocky letters. "Is supernatural love the new reality?" demanded talk shows, with frantic hosts debating the validity of Jasper's transformation and Paige's sanity. The clip of his eyes glowing amber and the subtle change in his jawline went viral, a loop of disbelief and terror that replayed on every news outlet and social media feed. The studio, which had been a haven of manufactured happiness, became a scene of absolute, delightful chaos. The producers, who had been on the verge of a collective cardiac event, were now a frenzied mix of terror and glee. The ratings had gone through the roof. The show, which was on the verge of being cancelled for its low viewership, had suddenly become a global phenomenon. Brittany, the peppy production assistant, now had a permanent look of wide-eyed shock, a look that was only momentarily replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated excitement whenever a new media outlet requested an interview. Paige and Jasper, however, had disappeared from the public eye. They had been whisked away from the studio in a black SUV, a team of lawyers and publicists swarming them with frantic instructions. They were told to stay quiet, to not comment, to let the storm pass. For the first time since she had arrived at the studio, Paige felt a strange sense of peace. The chaos of the outside world, the screaming headlines, the endless debates, all of it was just noise. The only thing that mattered was the man sitting beside her. They had found a quiet apartment, a temporary hideout from the media. It was a cozy space with a small kitchen and a large window that overlooked a park. It was nothing like her old bedroom, filled with dust motes and the ghosts of forgotten dreams. This space, though temporary, felt like a real home. It was filled with the scent of coffee, of fresh paint, and the subtle, earthy scent that was uniquely Jasper. Jasper, for his part, was surprisingly calm. He had faced down angry pack rivals, supernatural threats, and even a particularly aggressive badger. The media frenzy, it turned out, was a walk in the park. He found a strange kind of humor in the situation. "You know," he'd said one morning watching a talk show host debate the legitimacy of his canines, "I always knew they were a bunch of drama queens. Now everyone else knows it too." His pack, after the initial shock and then grudging acceptance and a lot of "I told you so's" from Jasper's Aunt Agatha, had slowly warmed to Paige. They still found her aversion to raw meat puzzling, but her ability to keep Jasper in line was greatly admired. His alpha, a stern, powerful man named Julian, had met with her in a quiet coffee shop, his gaze assessing and serious. He had told her that the pack's ties to the human community were now more important than ever, and that she was a crucial part of that. He had also, with a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, told her that she was the only human he'd ever met who could throw a piece of wood at Jasper without getting a single scratch on them. It had been the highest compliment she had ever received. Her small graphic design business surprisingly exploded. Paige, the werewolf's mate, became an instant brand. Everyone, it seemed, wanted a website designed by the woman who had captivated a werewolf. Her inbox was filled with hundreds of emails from clients all over the world. Her old worn-out laptop was replaced with a new one, a powerful machine that could handle her workload with ease. Her office, now a proper studio in a building downtown, bustled with activity. She had hired a small team of 2 other designers, and for the first time in her life she felt a sense of purpose and pride. She had built something of her own. And she had done it all while being in love with a man who hauled at the moon. Life with Jasper was an adventure. Some days, it meant finding claw marks on the kitchen counter, a result of him trying to open a particularly stubborn jar of pickles. Other days, it meant waking up to him wrestling a rogue squirrel out of the attic, looking utterly pleased with himself. He had a strange, almost childlike fascination with the mundane parts of human life. He loved watching sitcoms, especially the cheesy ones, and would laugh at the most ridiculous jokes. He was a creature of primal instincts, but he was also a man who loved bad television and hated doing laundry. He had a habit of sniffing her hair, her clothes, her skin, a low rumbling sound in his chest. "What are you doing?" she'd asked one day, a mixture of amusement and confusion in her voice. "I'm just enjoying your scent," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "It's like fresh laundry and a summer rainstorm. It's my favorite smell." It was a strange compliment, but it made her heart melt a little bit. One crisp autumn morning, a few months after the finale, Paige sat on their porch swing, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. The sun was rising, a soft orange and pink light spreading across the sky, painting the clouds in a symphony of colors. Jasper, in human form, was jogging down the street with a local dog owner, a rather bewildered golden retriever trotting beside him. He had made friends with all the dogs in the neighborhood, a little pack of his own, and he loved taking them for runs. It was a normal human thing to do, but it felt special because it was him. He loped back, a wide grin on his face. "Morning, sunshine. Just took Buster for a quick run. He's fast, but I'm faster." Paige laughed, shaking her head. "You're ridiculous." She patted the spot beside her on the swing. He sat, pulling her close. The simple silver ring he'd given her glinted on her finger, a constant reminder of their chaotic, beautiful beginning. "Did you really think I wouldn't say yes?" she murmured, leaning her head on his shoulder. He kissed her hair. "I hoped. You're pretty stubborn, you know." "Takes one to know one, werewolf," she teased. "This whole being married to a supernatural being in the public eye thing is a lot." "It is," he agreed, his arm tightening around her. "But you handle it with more grace than I ever could. And you still make me laugh." He nudged her. "Besides, you're never bored." Paige smiled, looking out at the rising sun. The world was still a messy, complicated place. But with Jasper, it was also vibrant, unpredictable, and full of a love she never could have imagined. Her old bedroom, the one with the peeling wallpaper, felt a million miles away. Her spark hadn't just survived, It had ignited into a roaring bonfire. She had come here for a paycheck, but she had found something so much more. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt perfectly, wonderfully, ridiculously fated. Want to see more epic paranormal romance stories? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss my next story.